Hello, my name is Father Tom Lucas. I'm University Professor of Art and Architecture at the University of San Francisco, and I'd like to welcome you today for a mini course called From Space to Place, The Landscapes of Jesuit Higher Education. We might subtitle this presentation, How We Got From There to Here. I'd like to start by doing something that Jesuits always do at the beginning of any presentation, and that's to make a distinction. Space does not equal place, and place does not equal space. To illustrate with two images. That is a space. This is a place. Space may indeed be the final frontier, but place is what matters to us. Place is space, Philip Sheldrake tells us, that has a capacity to be remembered, to evoke what is most precious. Place is not anywhere, but rather the mystery of a somewhere. Place, Walter Brueggemann tells us, is space that has historical meaning, where some things have happened that are now remembered, that provide continuity across generations, where important words have been spoken that have established identity, defined vocation, or envisioned destiny. Place is about rootedness, about belonging, about commitment, about participation, about relation and relationship. Place is where organic social life is possible, where culture is made and nourished. Taken collectively, places constitute the landscapes we inhabit, landscapes understood as relational places embodying, literally and metaphorically embodying our emotions, our memories, and our associations. So here's a question. Our campus, is it a space or is it a place? Space implies freedom, yet there's an element of randomness involved. There's no there. Think of airports or motels or sitting in front of the TV or in front of your computer. Place is quite different. Place implies intentionality, a landscape where social life or organic culture, where learning and devotion are possible. Think of home, think of church, think of the village green, think of a campus. So today we'll look at the landscapes of Higher Ed 101, beginning with the Garden of Eden and going to the Jesuit colleges and universities of 2012. The story begins in a garden, as many good stories do. The garden as the first educational venue. The Garden of Eden was a laboratory of taxonomy. Adam's first task was to name and classify the animals. You are a cow, you are a crocodile. It's where we discovered nakedness, for good and for evil, where indeed we discovered the mystery of good and evil. The garden served as an educational venue throughout the ancient world. Plato's academy met regularly in a garden, and most of the academies of the ancient world were informal places and were informal gatherings that frequently met out of doors. As Roman culture collapsed with the barbarian invasions in the 400s, learning retreated into monastic isolation. Cities fell apart. What little learning continued in the West was done in libraries of isolated monasteries. It was only in the 12th century, when urban centers began to reemerge in cathedral schools and in more prosperous places, that a professional class of schoolmen began to emerge, men who valued knowledge for its own sake and who began to teach in more populous areas. Yet these first universities, spread across the great cities of Europe, were physically undefined. They resided in quarters within the urban context, not on campuses as we know them now. Indeed, the Latin Quarter in Paris got its name because it was the student neighborhood where students tended to speak Latin. This was the world into which Ignatius Loyola entered in 1530 as a college student, and it was here that he first made the contacts that would become the nucleus of the Society of Jesus. It was a lively world. There were new methodologies of education in the air. There was openness to Renaissance humanism, and they were in the midst of what we might call an IT revolution. Books were available readily and inexpensively for the first time. This was a far cry from the world that Ignatius knew as a child and as a young man and as a Spanish knight. He grew up in an isolated valley in the Basque region of northern Spain. Yet after his conversion, Ignatius became an inveterate traveler. He traveled as far as Jerusalem with dreams of converting the infidels. Yet he returned to Europe, realizing he needed the tools it would take to become a churchman and to become an effective spokesman. So at the age of 30, he returned to grammar school in Spain, where he rapidly ran afoul of the Spanish Inquisition. So it was that he left his native Spain for studies in Paris for a period of about 7 years, during which time he traveled as far as London. So by the time Ignatius landed in Rome in 1537, he had visited most of the great cities of Europe. The Rome he found in 1537 was a motley place. 50,000 inhabitants, only a quarter of them native Romans, whose principal industries included the church, pilgrimage or sacral tourism, and prostitution. It was precisely in this context that Ignatius and his first companions founded the Jesuit order. The Pope said, "Here's a good and true Jerusalem for you if you seek to do God's work." And it was here in 1540 that Ignatius presented to the Pope for the first time the constitutions of the Society of Jesus. From the beginning, the Jesuits were on the move and at home in the crowd. They began their stay in Rome in a vineyard house on the edge of the city, rapidly moving into rented rooms, to a haunted house which they got for a particularly low rent because it had a poltergeist in it, finally settling in the center of the city in an auspicious location, although the real estate was nothing to speak of, a small chapel and a little house. But what a location it was, in the mixed at the center of the city. The Pope lived next door in his favorite summer palace, the Palazzo Venezia. The city hall was a block away. They were only 2 long blocks from the Jewish neighborhood. They were in the middle of the red light district, not too far from the Vatican, and in what we would call now the center of the redevelopment zone of the city. It was in Rome that the Jesuit DNA was established as we know it now. And in the constitutions of the Society of Jesus, Ignatius specifically targets locations for the Jesuits' work. Preference, he says, ought to be shown to aid which is given to great nations such as the Indies, to important cities, or to universities which are attended by numerous persons who by being aided themselves can become laborers for the good of others. In a document that went out in everybody's saddlebags in the 1550s, he gives an instruction on how to proceed. He says, "Take special care that you obtain a good and sufficiently large site, or one that can be enlarged with time, large enough for house and church, and if possible, not too far removed from the conversation of the city. And having bought that, it will be the good beginning for all that follows. Take special care that you obtain a good and sufficiently large site, not too far removed from the conversation of the city." What the University of San Francisco has recently done with the acquisition of the Folger Building in downtown San Francisco. Let's consider a case study. The Renaissance capital of Firenze, of Florence. Ignatius desperately wanted to have an outpost there and sent one of his most talented friends and companions, Diego Lainez, to negotiate with the Medici family for a college and a residence and a church in Florence. What we might call the razionale alla Fiorentina, good with a little red sauce, was his argument for a downtown campus rather than a more remote location in Pisa or Prato. Ignatius says, a house has already been offered to us. There is greater public advantage for the city. The good seeds of Christian doctrine can be sown for youth and for vocation prospects. There's a greater number of the poor to serve in the city, greater pastoral opportunities for confessions and preaching and teaching. They could be closer to the princes. Well, after 6 years, 75 letters, and hundreds of conversations, Ignatius finally got what he wanted. A small church next to the Medici Palace, next to the Medici Church of San Lorenzo, and a block from the cathedral. There, in the very center of the city, the Jesuits had their urban outpost. The Jesuit college and church evolved as a unified educational, cultural, and cultic center across the globe. The growth of early Jesuit colleges was phenomenal, from one in Messina in 1543 to more than 800 in 1773 when the Society of Jesus was suppressed. This map gives you a bird's eye view of Rome and a strategic view of the Jesuit strategy. At the center of the city, in very large scale, the mother church of the Jesuit, where Ignatius was buried, and next to it, the Collegio Romano. Ignatius and other Jesuits are seen at the top of this image working on benefactors. Here we see the church and the college as the center of a corona of social and pastoral works, as a dynamic center around which educational institutions and social and pastoral ministries evolved in the cityscape. A paradigm, if you will, of the distributed campus. The mothership of the Jesuit colleges and universities was the Collegio Romano. Here we see Pope Gregory XIII beginning an urban redevelopment program which wiped out 3 square blocks of downtown Rome to make space for a campus that included a church larger than our own St. Ignatius. In this image, we see Pope Gregory approving Jesuit colleges and universities for Japan, for Vilnius, and for Mexico City. Indeed, the Jesuit college in Rome had the largest facade in the city until the completion of St. Peter's in the 1620s. The Renaissance and Baroque Jesuit College stood as a synthesis of scholasticism and humanism, as a center of knowledge, as a center for art and persuasion, as a center for religious devotion at the heart of the city. As centers of knowledge, the Jesuit colleges were equipped with grand libraries, with museums, with important observatories. Famous scholars studied and taught at many of them, including Athanasius Kircher, who invented, among other things, the slide projector. The colleges served as centers of art and persuasion. In most of Catholic Europe, they were the only legitimate theater allowed in town. And over the space of almost 200 years, more than 100,000 plays and concerts were performed in those theaters. Linked into this was the humanist ideal of education for citizenship. Ignatius's secretary wrote, "If we see to the education of youth in letters and morality, then great help for the Republic will follow. Good priests, good senators, and good citizens of every class will come from these efforts." Updating that slightly is the preamble to the draft charter of Loyola College in Baltimore from 1853. "The education of our youth is a sure means of securing good and useful citizens, and an important aid in the perpetuation of our free institutions." The Jesuit church attached to the college served as a local center of devotion as well. Magnificent churches grew up all over Europe, indeed all over the world, as centers for ritual activity and for music and culture. The Church of San Paul and San Luis is an echo of our Church of St. Ignatius in San Francisco. To take another case study, let's look at Peter Canisius. Peter Canisius, the great Jesuit educator of the second generation of the Jesuits, who resembles not only in face but a bit in personality Donald Trump, traveled across Europe, walked something like 15,000 miles across Europe, founding colleges and universities throughout the German-speaking Catholic world. In downtown Munich, next to the cathedral, the Onion Dome building you see on the right, he founded the College of St. Michael, 2.5 acres in the core of the city, with a splendid church, with a theater, and with halls that could accommodate much of the urban population. Even more impressive was the Jesuits' move into Vienna, the imperial capital. There in Vienna, Canisius first obtained a house across from the Hofburg, the imperial palace, and later a very important piece of property just across the street from the cathedral, which became the seat of the Jesuit University. In the imperial city of Prague, at the opening of the Charles Bridge, the one bridge across the Moldau, the Jesuits obtained almost 5 acres of land, where they built the Clementinum, the College of St. Clement, which contained in its campus 5 different churches and the largest library and the largest observatory in Eastern Europe. This was the beginning of a global network of centers of knowledge, of devotion, and art, which extended as far as India and Macau, which reached even into 17th and 18th century Beijing, where Jesuits served as the imperial court astronomers. It reached into the New World, where the great College of San Ildefonso in Mexico City is a stone's throw from the side door of the cathedral. It reached into Cusco as well, the imperial capital of the Incas, where the Jesuit church, seen on the right, rivaled the beauty of the cathedral. Meanwhile, down on the farm, a proposal was made in 1789 for the foundation of an academy on the Potomac River in Maryland, an academy of 2 small buildings which eventually evolved into Georgetown University, the first of the Jesuit colleges and universities of the United States, located as it is at the edge of the great Baroque urban plan of Washington, D.C. The Jesuit adventure in higher education in California began with the arrival of Michael Accolti in 1849. The Italian exiled missionary, who was working in Oregon, heard of the California gold rush and got on the first ship he could find to come down and to assay the situation, in clear disobedience from orders he had already received from Rome that no one should go to California. 3 months later, he writes to Rome, "Here we are in California, come not to seek gold in this land of opportunity, but to do a little good." A few months later, Father Accolti wrote to Rome, outlining what we might call the razionale alla californiana. He says, "There are no schools in San Francisco except those run by Protestants. There's a great host of children needing the benefits of an education. Catholics galore streaming in from all over the world into the gold rush. People cry aloud for priests," he says, looking for confessions, preaching, and catechesis. San Francisco, he says, will soon become the leading commercial place of California and for the entire world. From our first campus, a 1-room schoolhouse in a sand dune at 4th and Market Street, St. Ignatius College evolved as it moved first to the site of Davies Symphony Hall in the Civic Center, where a grand Italianate palazzo was built in a church larger than our own present St. Ignatius. That campus fell in the fire and earthquake of 1906 and was soon replaced by the Hilltop campus that we know and love today. A Hilltop campus expanded with the purchase of Lone Mountain in the 1980s. The university continues to grow. Recently, we have acquired a campus site in the Presidio, and with the most recent acquisition of 101 Howard Street at the corner of Howard and Spear, we return to our original downtown roots. The university expands beyond the limits of the city and county of San Francisco as well. We now have important branch campuses in Santa Rosa, in the state capital of Sacramento, in Pleasanton at the confluence of 2 great rivers of freeway, and in the city of San Jose. What this points to is the university's desire to broadcast its message, not to narrowcast, to take the risk of exploring new educational endeavors and new educational opportunities, even into relatively uncharted worlds and experiences such as distance education. To return to our summary of the landscapes of education. Late in the 19th and early in the 20th century, a model of the Germano-American university begins to emerge. Campuses that are discrete and distinct centers, most of which required playing fields because of the focus on sport and hygiene that came in this period, the need for intra and intramural sports and activities. The notion of campus was redefined. Downtown campuses were abandoned for more spacious opportunities on the edges of cities, and as public transportation and automobiles entered into the equation, the possibility of larger campuses on the edges of town became very real. The 21st century presents us with a variety of challenges as we understand campus's place. We need to preserve and to create places that are memorable, that speak to our tradition of knowledge, of culture, of art, and devotion. Within our campus frameworks, we need to create destinations and definitions. We need to take what is old and make it new and make it beautiful and make it functional. We need to bring both new technology and new art into our campus settings. We need to encourage and model sustainability so that we can train responsible students for the future. We need to provide and create campus places for what we might call civic education and socialization, venues where our students can safely try on adult behavior. places where, as Brueggemann says, important words can be spoken that establish identity, that define vocation, that envision destiny. One such location will be the bridge in the Lo Schiavo Center for Science and Innovation. One can hardly imagine a better place to break up with your girlfriend or your boyfriend in a public situation. We need to encourage engagement rather than electronic isolation. We need to address new learning and study patterns, of group study, of group milling about, of new technologies of education and of knowledge acquisition and distance education. We need to continue to expand from the hilltop even more deliberately into the urban game. To close with an encouraging word or two, we've come a long way already. Creativity has always been part of our game since the time of St. Ignatius. And we need to remember and embrace the fact that what we do matters deeply. It directly shapes the future health and the success of our institution. There are challenging questions out there for us as well. Are we sufficiently in conversation with the city? Are we sowing the seeds of knowledge and virtue as widely as we can? Are we willing to think outside the box and off this hilltop that we love? Are we willing to continue to invest in placemaking rather than space holding? Do we have the courage for the immense and rewarding task ahead? Space may indeed be the final frontier, but place is what matters. We together are creators of memory. Thank you for helping us to build USF. I'm Father Tom Lucas of the USF faculty.